Great. I'm all ready.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts, and I'm super excited to see Rob Schwartz. Be in conversation with him, actually. This is the second time I'm meeting him. He actually came to the Ashland Library a few months ago, and we had the most fabulous time. So I was really, really pleased when he said he would be willing to do a virtual program with us. So a couple things before we get started. I wanted to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. I'd like to also thank Rob for letting us share this program with other libraries, because anybody who knows me knows that I'm going to say this: when libraries work together, we make magic. And you can buy signed books by Rob from my favorite indie bookstore, Aesop's Fable, which is in Holliston, the town next door to us. And I will put a link to that in the chat and in a follow-up email. If you have questions for Rob, please put them in the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And this chat is open. You're welcome to use it to chat with each other. Sometimes it goes by a little bit too quickly for me to catch all the questions, though. So please put your questions in the Q&A. So you might know Rob. You might know his father. Iconic story, Tuesdays with Morrie. Rob is Morrie's son, but he also has his own amazing life. So we're going to hear all about Morrie. We're going to hear all about Rob's current book, which came out a couple of years ago, but was an original manuscript by Morrie that you
That's right.
edited.
We'll tell the story.
Yep. And anything you want to know from him, he is ready to answer. So welcome, Rob. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you so much. And I love the fact that people's names and where they're from is on the bottom, because I saw my wonderful relative from Amherst, Mass, Janet Potash. So I have to give a shout out to Janet. Hi, Janet. It's great to have you with us. And, there she is. That's the other side of the family, but we all feel like we're one big family. That's my mother's side of the family.
So just to get us started, for people who don't know who Morrie was, can you tell us a little bit about how his story came to be like this iconic thing?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of different ways to approach that, but I'm going to go before the illness, right? I mean, when he got ill, the amount of people paying attention to him really changed, and we'll get into that. But no, my father was a professor at Brandeis University, and one who was very much interested in the community and talking to people and trying to help people. I mean, one of the courses he taught at Brandeis was called Group Process, was literally how do we deal with each other in groups and in a society. And in some ways, you could say that is the basis of sociology. Sociology today is much more data driven, and my father would not like that at all. It's totally almost a different field than when he participated in it. But he was a very beloved professor at Brandeis. I mean, people say that, but this was really true about him. And you can get the sense of that from Tuesdays with Morrie. I'll give a few examples of that. When my father became a professor at Brandeis, it was the 1950s. But of course, by the 1960s, the country had changed a lot, and Brandeis was one of the most radical campuses in the United States. When the students would have a problem with the administration or take over a building, they would call my father to come and listen to their demands and take their demands to the president of the university because they trusted him. He was one of the few members of the faculty that they trusted, and they certainly didn't trust anybody in the administration. I have vivid memories of my father, like them opening a window of a building that they were occupying and helping him through. He was a small man, helping him through the window so he could come in and talk to them and find out what they would want and take it to the administration. So he really was a beloved professor at Brandeis. And he did do some things in public. Like he actually had a lecture series that he delivered to women's groups around the country. And this was through Brandeis. So it might have been Jewish women's groups, I can't remember, or women's groups related to Brandeis. But he did do speaking tours while he was alive. But obviously he got much, much less publicity than once he was on Nightline and then Mitch's book came out. Of course, when Mitch's book came out, he was no longer with us, and we'll get into that. But as a professor and one who had a quite long career, we can talk about how it started as well, which I think is pretty fascinating. And I really do believe the book that I brought out, which, as you mentioned, was his manuscript. People say it's my book, but it's actually his book. I edited it. I wrote some essays, but the manuscript, the whole of the book, is my father, a manuscript that he wrote before he passed. And that book really does bring together sort of all of his life philosophies, all the things that he believed in. He believed in creating community. He believed in obviously paying attention to people who need help. And there's lots of examples of that through his life, which I can point to as well. But the book brings together a lot of strands. He wrote it because he was very distressed by the ageism in our society. And when he wrote it, he was in his early 70s already. But that issue had never occurred to him because he didn't consider himself an elderly person. And for most of his life, he wasn't an elderly person. But once he reached that stage, he realized, like, wow, people really denigrate people who are after a certain age in life. And that's ridiculous. They have so much in experience and knowledge to share with everybody. So this is a problem we have to address. So that was the impetus for him to write the book. But it really does bring together all of the philosophies and all of the ideas he had, both as an academic, which the ideas are kind of academic, and just as a member of the community, a concerned person, somebody who's very, very much in tune with humanity, let's say, or other people around him.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the book is called The Wisdom of Morrie because it is his reflections on what happened to him at Brandeis, right?
Well, that's where it started. I mean, when he wrote the book, he was no longer a active professor. He was an emeritus professor, which he joked meant without merit. But he did still teach one course a year until he was no longer able to, right at the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit then about, I kind of want to crowdsource this question too of like, where were you when the book came out? When did you read Tuesdays with Morrie? For people in the audience, let us know if you remember reading it and what you were like, what was happening in your life at the time, because it came out and it was like a major hit. And why? What was it
Okay,
about?
well, actually, I want to step back just a step before Tuesdays with Morrie, because I think setting it up, especially if you want my contribution, setting it up with the illness and then Mitch and all of that leading up to Tuesdays with Morrie, because the book actually coming out, that's a little bit different. My father was no longer with us. So let's go back to him getting ill. He was retired from being a professor. He was forced to be retired from being a professor, which plays into the reason why he wrote The Wisdom of Morrie, though it didn't have that title at the time. And then, he, this illness came out of nowhere. He was always very healthy. And when he was, let me get the years right now, he was already, 76 or 77. There was probably a year or so where it was undiagnosed. My father, he loved to dance. He moved very light on his feet. He started to stumble a little bit. He didn't feel just right. He felt a little bit ill, but nobody knew what it was. I remember one of the first times we were driving around and he was just like, oh, I just don't feel right. He called it, he had malaise, which, if you know that word, it just means an overall feeling of being poor or, illness or out of something is wrong. And he had no idea what was wrong. And then finally, we got the diagnosis in July of 1994. There's little things that I'm sure don't have much meaning to the general public, but I like to set the record straight. So in Tuesdays with Morrie, it's not portrayed exactly correctly. We weren't in a doctor's office. The doctor actually came to our house in West Newton, Massachusetts, was sitting at our dining table when he said, this is what it is. It's ALS. And he said, you probably have between 12 and 18 months to live. And my father lived 16 months. It was like exactly accurate. And so then once he got the illness, as is described a little bit in Tuesdays with Morrie, and is certainly described in the Nightline interviews, he was very depressed for a while, but then he decided like, okay, I'm going to use the final time that I have to talk about the things I think are important and try and communicate with people. And he started talking and doing those things. And it just so happened that a very close friend of his, who is also a sociology professor at Brandeis named Morrie Stein, also named Morrie, knew the editor of the Boston Globe, or one of the editors, which is the big paper in Boston, the important paper. And they sent a wonderful human interest reporter to the house to talk to my dad. This guy's name is Jack Thomas. He's a wonderful, wonderful writer. He wrote many beautiful stories in the Boston Globe about people doing good things. He passed away a couple of years ago, and I wrote an appreciation of Jack Thomas in the Boston Globe magazine. All of this is online if you want to find it. So Jack Thomas came to the house and he wrote this huge spread, 2 full pages. Some people have probably seen it. Professor uses his final lesson, what is it, his last days or something like that, to teach. And that sort of kickstarted attention to my father. And then the second crucial part of the story is he was, doing little radio shows. He did actually a WGBH thing here with actually a former student of his was hosting a program, and he interviewed him on that show. But there was a senior producer at Nightline named Richard Harris, who's from the Boston area, who's from Marblehead. And he still got, this is back when people still read physical newspapers. He got the paper delivered to his Washington office, and he saw this article and he said, why don't we bring Morrie onto Nightline? And Ted agreed, and then the first program was a massive hit, right? People really responded to it. And you may or may not remember, Nightline would only ever do one show on one topic. They wouldn't do a series, but there was so much response to my father's show that they did 3, right? They did 1 a couple months later, and they literally came maybe 10 days, 2 weeks before his death, a little bit longer than, like 2 to 3 weeks before his death, when he was really compromised. So that really kickstarted things. And I really have to, give our thanks so deeply to Richard Harris, who passed away earlier this year. He was a great man. And he's the reason that all of this happened, because he found the article and he put my father on Nightline. He also helped me greatly with this book to promote it. And he was very well connected in the TV industry. He got me on Good Morning America and PBS NewsHour. So he continued. And in addition to that, he actually wrote articles, the 10th anniversary of Tuesdays with Morrie and the 20th anniversary. He wrote an article about the international reach of Tuesdays with Morrie. If you search Richard Harris, Tuesdays with Morrie, you can find that article. He interviewed me because I talked about China and Japan and how Tuesdays with Morrie had made it into the consciousness of those countries. So, of course, at the first Nightline show, Mitch came back. So you're asking me where I was. This is kind of the answer to your question, because I was there for a lot of the time that Mitch was interviewing my father. And first of all, in the beginning, we had no idea that anything was come of it. Mitch was a sports writer, right? A famous and extremely successful sports writer, but a sports writer. And he was coming every week to interview my dad. And at the same time, since we knew my father's time was pretty limited, I mean, this would already be like, March, April, May, we're talking less than 6 months to live. I set up a video camera and I would video my father having discussions with various friends and with Mitch. I actually have the time that Mitch brought Janine, his wife, to meet my dad, and Janine actually sang for my father. This is described in the play. Mitch also wrote a play called Tuesdays with Morrie, which is performed around the country quite regularly. I recently did Q&A after a performance in Greenville, South Carolina. That was a wonderful performance that they did. So I have all this videotape that I shot while my father was alive, speaking with people, including Mitch. And then, of course, Mitch came for every week. I was going back and forth between Tokyo and Boston. So I was a journalist, so I could write my articles while I was in Boston and send them over there and then go back for a while, then come back to Boston. So I met Mitch regularly at that time. And of course, all of this happened. Then my father passed in November of 1995. Mitch hadn't even started writing the book. He had just written some query letters to publishers about this is the story that I want to do. And I believe it's in the 25th anniversary edition, which is the one that's out now. He includes some of the rejection letters he got for Tuesdays with Morrie. Very clever and funny. So it had just been accepted, like just weeks before my father passed. So my father knew that Mitch's book was going to be published, but he didn't have any other information. He didn't see any chapters or any writing of it. And then, of course, he passed away, and Mitch started to write Tuesdays with Morrie. Mm-hmm. So the interesting thing is there, first of all, it took him a while. My father passed in November of 95, and I don't know when he was finished or when it was accepted, but it was published in 1997. So easily a year and a half, if not more, later. And when it was published, when it came out, Tuesdays with Morrie was not a big hit. It was not a bestseller whatsoever. I don't know if I said this when we were in your library, but I like to do this in front of a live audience because I always question them. So this will only be to you, Mina. But one person found the book, loved it, and she made all the difference. And that person is
Oprah.
Okay, a few hints. They had a TV show that was extremely popular.
Well, Oprah, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Oprah found the book, loved it, put it on her Book of the Month club, had Mitch on her program. The book skyrocketed to #1 and stayed there for 5 consecutive years. #1. I mean, it's unheard of, completely unheard of. 5 consecutive years, #1, New York Times, hardback, nonfiction bestseller. So that was just mind-blowing to all of us. So you asked where I was at that time. I mean, I was more or less living in Tokyo. I would come back regularly to see my mother, but I was living in Tokyo. Of course, we were aware of what was going on. So, the book reached #1. That's incredible. Oh, the book's been #1 for a month. That's amazing. The book's been #1 for 6 months. After 2 years, you're like, you just throw up your hands like, this is crazy, right? This is unprecedented. And there was one other point I was going to make about that. Right. Oprah found it, put it on her Book of the Month club. She was also extremely clever businesswoman, as we know. So she bought the rights for the movie, and she was the one that decided it's going to be a made-for-TV movie. So it was a made-for-TV movie. I think that came out in 2000 and 2001, around then. And since all the movie rights were tied up, and Mitch seems, I don't want to speak for Mitch, but it seems like he wanted to continue to work on this project, he wrote a play. And then the play premiered in New York and did very well, and is kind of a play that lots of theater companies turn to because it's only a 2-person play, and it's from a very well-known book. So, it's easier for them to get attendance and stuff like that. And the made-for-TV movie, maybe people remember, Jack Lemmon played my father, Hank Azaria played Mitch. It won some Golden Globe Awards. Jack Lemmon won an award for it. And there's all these crazy connections that you find out after the fact. Jack Lemmon's hometown is Newton, Massachusetts. I had no idea about that until many years later. I actually wanted to try and find Jack and talk to him about it because he did a great job. But as people probably know, he passed away like maybe a year and a half at most after that production. And the Tuesdays with Morrie is his last credited role. Yeah.
So let's go back again a little bit so people get sick all the time. But something about Morrie and the story, what was he doing that was so fascinating to us? I think we talked about this in April, was that he was inviting people into your home to just hang out, really. What was that for?
Well, I would say it's more than just to hang out, but certainly that was part of it. He was inviting people to talk about things that were really important. And one of those topics was death. At that time, I would say even now, it's somewhat taboo to talk about death. People don't want to talk about it. It's scary. It's unpleasant. It's sad. but he felt, that it was really important to talk about it. He's not the first person to say, this topic needs to be discussed and write books about it. There's plenty of stuff out there. I think isn't there a woman named, I think it's Rosabeth Cantor is her name, who was one of the first people to write extensively on death and society. She's a sociologist. So, how societies approach death, if I'm not mistaken. But so he was talking about that. He was talking about other issues in society that are important to people, big issues, politics, and small issues about people's personal life. Obviously, he had been doing this his whole life. As I said, he had taught courses like group process, which were how we relate to each other. And people responded to that. There were, various groups in our house. Certainly he was bringing friends in, but there were friends of friends, and there was extended community around him coming into the house to discuss these things. Yeah.
How was it for you? And I think you have siblings as well, and your mother, to have all these people in your home when you were losing your father. Like, did you want to keep him to yourself? How did that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to answer because I can tell you about my mother, and my brother wasn't living at home at that point, though of course he would visit sometimes, and I would come and go. So it's not like we were, constantly at home and all these people were pouring through. But for sure, for my mother, it was something that she put up with. My mother was a private person, which is why you barely read anything of her in Tuesdays with Morrie. That was very intentional. She asked Mitch not to say much about her in the book, and he respected that. They had a very close relationship, my mother and Mitch. And for me, I mean, it wasn't that difficult to, share, as you say, Dad, with all these people that were coming through. But it does sort of relate to a larger question, which we can talk about now, we can talk about later, which is there's always a difference between the public persona and the actual person. And that's just always the way it is. And it's just so interesting because Tuesdays with Morrie is so personal and so emotional. People who read it feel like they know my father intimately. And I mean, I don't have any problem with that. It's wonderful that people feel that way. And we're very gratified that they do. But you hope that people understand that, come on, you just read a book. It's not like you actually knew this person and spent time with them, even over many, many years. But I think that that's my father's personality that, can transcend the page and really touch people's hearts. So, but that idea that the public persona is going to be different than the actual person, looms larger and larger as the book gets more and more popular. And my father has passed away, right? And then all sorts of different things happen. So that's something that you always have to deal with for any person who's in the public eye. It's always true for any movie star or pop star. People think they know them, but of course they don't. They just know what that person puts out in the public. And it's always going to be that way. With my father, the public persona and the actual person are much closer than in most cases, but they're not the same, right? So.
Yeah, you related some really great stories about your time with him. I mean, you were there, obviously, at the end there, but you were, what was he like as a father to you?
Yeah, I mean, he was a great father. I have to, what is the word, sort of moderate myself when I talk about this, because I'm always hesitant to try and make him sound like, ideal, like a saint. Obviously, nobody is a saint. So bearing that in mind, he was a really great father. I mean, he wasn't particularly athletically inclined. So it's not like, I mean, I'm reasonably athletic. I played basketball, I played tennis. He never did those things with me, but he did all the father things, teach me to ride a bicycle and, take us to amusement parks and spend time with us. We had incredible family vacations. And basically, as you can tell from the book, this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody. He was an incredibly loving person. So, of course, the recipient of most of that love, or a lot of that love, is going to be his family. Mm-hmm. So, to me, that's the most important thing, that you grow up in an incredibly loving household. And, he had a lot of time for us. That's why he liked being a professor, because it wasn't that demanding on his time. He had a lot of time to spend with the family, summers off, et cetera. So yeah, he was a wonderful father. And I mean, there's a funny story that we actually told within my family. So I'll tell the story now, because students at Brandeis always used to come up, and I'm not exaggerating now, this all happened. Students at Brandeis used to come up, and remember, my father's not famous at this time, and tell me, oh my God, your dad is so amazing. I wish I had a dad like him. And when you're a kid hearing this, you always think like, oh, you guys don't know what you're talking about. He can be a disciplinarian or whatever, which wasn't really true. But as a kid, you feel that way. But in retrospect, obviously those students were right. And I was a 10-year-old who would never be able to understand what a great father he was until I was older. Then there's one other story that the family always told, and this is when I was younger, maybe 6 or 7. A student came up to me at Brandeis and said, oh, your father's so amazing. If there's anything that you could change about him, would you want to change it? And I sat there and thought for a while and said, he's too short. So that's an old family story from when I was a little kid.
I'm curious about the timeline of your father's death, and then the book coming out and becoming this big seller. So you actually had some time to actually grieve the death of your father before he became this worldwide, phenomenon.
That's right. Yeah. Though it's interesting you should say that, because it's still a little difficult to talk about, but it actually took me a long time to properly grieve my father, like years and years. We were extremely close. And, even when you're going to lose somebody, and I'm sure there's people out there who have lost people who will be able to relate to this, even when you're going to lose somebody and they're ill or whatever, they're extremely old, when it actually happens, it's still a shock. And there's this gigantic vacuum in your life. And if you're not used to that, it's, it's very hard to deal with it healthily and grieve properly. And it took me an actual very long time to grieve properly. After he passed, my sort of journalism career and career as a music manager in Tokyo sort of took off a little bit. And I was very busy and doing lots of things and leading an exciting life. And yeah, it was tough to grieve properly. In addition to that, this happened for a while. I used to have these dreams that were so real and so vivid with my father. And I would literally think in the dream, oh, Dad didn't die. He's actually still alive. And I would be talking to him. And then, of course, I would wake up and be like, of course, he's dead, And that happened for a long time. That happened for years after, not 15 years, but 3 or 4 years after he passed. And I would say it took me at least 5 years to even start to properly grieve my father. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's sad, but it's also really interesting because your father spent the last 16 months of his life talking to people about death. Did he talk to you?
Yes.
Yeah. Did he talk to you as well?
Sure, a little bit. But the point is that you can talk about it all you want. When the person that you love is no longer there, that's a different experience. I think, and this is just my view on it, and you can take it for what it's worth. I think when my father was talking about death, yeah, you can look at it as trying to prepare people to lose somebody in their life. But what he's really talking about is to prepare you for your own death, right? That's the big one. That's the, how we approach that is really the sort of the final question. And I think that's what he was trying to address in people more than like, oh, you may lose somebody that you love, though he did address that as well. And that's certainly in the play as
Mhm.
well. There's scenes where the end of the play, he tells Mitch, come to my grave and talk and I'll listen,
Mhm.
And yeah, and I do go to his grave regularly, which is
Mhm.
right next to the Newton Free Library in Newton, Massachusetts, as we were discussing. It's apparently out there. A long time ago, people approached me. It's like, where is your father's grave? I was like, nah, wonder if it's okay to tell it. But apparently it's on the internet. Like you can easily find it on the
Mhm.
internet if you want to. So there you go. It's in Newton, Massachusetts.
Wow. Being in Massachusetts, it just gives me chills. Like this story, this person who is the story is based on is here. This all happened here. Josie wants to know, and I think it's a good question. How do you define grief properly for yourself? Because it's different for everybody. What helped you?
Wow. Wow, that's a big question. How do I define grief and what helped me? Well, I mean, this is some of my personal philosophy that I'll put out there that did help me. I've spent, and we can talk about me if you like, most of my life in Asia. Now I live in LA, but I spent most of my life in Asia, most of my life in Japan. And this was informed by me studying philosophy, reading a lot of Asian philosophy, Indian, and that part of the world. And I do relate more to those philosophies, to a Hindu Buddhist philosophy. And I actually do think that reincarnation makes the most sense as a if you're going to have faith in something, you're going to believe in something. So for me, that helped to think that there's some cycle that's ongoing, that's repeated, as opposed to somebody's just gone forever. So that's one thing that helped me, and also just to see how many people he's touched and reached out to and have related to what he's had to say is obviously very gratifying for the family. But I think that and this may or may not be what people want to hear. I think that grieving is a lifelong process. I don't think you're ever done with it. I mean, there's days when I miss him so much that it's physically painful, and I think that that's just the way it is. I don't think that there's any answer to grieving. I don't think you can find any formulas like, oh, I grieve for that person, that's that. If it's somebody who was so important in your life that you shared so much love with, that, yeah, I don't think that you're ever going to get over that,
Mhm.
whether it's a parent or a spouse or a child or a good friend or something like that.
Yeah.
I see a question here. I'd like to, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
because it's Janet, my cousin. She says, how does your book fit in with Letting Go, which should have been better known? So I love to talk about this. So we have to move the timeline back to when my father got ill. Towards the end of his life, he got an offer from a publishing company called Walker to write down all of these aphorisms that he had been talking about. He had been published in some places. He had been talking about, he had lots of aphorisms. And he was actually so ill. I didn't know this until quite recently. I talked to the editor in chief or the president of Walker, who told me he was actually so ill that my father couldn't write this. Walker sent a person to the house and he talked and she recorded what he wrote, and they made a book called Letting Go out of it, which was renamed, by the way. If you wanted to buy a copy of it now, it's named Morrie in His Own Words. After Tuesdays with Morrie became a big hit, they renamed it to get Morrie in the title. So that book is full of aphorisms that hint at the same kind of things that he's talking about in Tuesdays with Morrie, and that he explicates in much more detail in the book that I published, The Wisdom of Morrie. I mean, The Wisdom of Morrie is really a professor writing while he's still healthy about these concepts. So he uses, lots of examples, but it's not academic, but that's the way he expresses himself. He uses lots of examples from newspaper articles, from stories, from people he interviewed, from poetry. There's tons and tons of different writing in there. And there's lots of different examples or different ways to view the same thing. And Letting Go, or More in His Own Words, is exactly the opposite of that. It's these short pithy sentences and that's it, that he moves on to the next thing. And some of them are echoed in Tuesdays with Morrie, like death ends a life, but not a relationship. Or let's see if I can remember some of the other aphorisms. Nah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's very pithy. And then it's just something for you to think about in your own mind. But the Wisdom of Morrie, things are explained in much more detail. There's much more different viewpoints included and other people's writings that he wants to show. And he interviewed a lot of people for this book, a lot of aging people, to get their perspective on things. So there's a lot more perspective, a lot more analysis in the Wisdom of Morrie. So I hope that answers Janet's question. Thanks.
Yes. I did want to let you know that I'll probably be sending the chat to Rob, so your stories will be shared with him, because I know he's probably not going to have time to read them right now. But they're wonderful stories that people are sharing in the chat about their own experiences. I was wondering if you could talk about how you found this manuscript, because I found that story incredibly fascinating.
Right. So again, we'll start at the beginning of this story, which is not how I found it, which is sort of the end of the story, but the fact that I was there when my father was writing it. Mm-hmm. So how this story begins is I had just done a 1.5-year trip around Asia, where I was in China and Tibet and India and Thailand, and I had just gotten back to the United States. This was May of 1989. So a long time ago. And my father had just started to seriously write this book. And I had been away traveling and then in Japan for a year before that. Before I moved back permanently, I spent a year or two there and then went travel. So I'd been away for, let's say, 2-3 years, something like that. So he was really happy to have me back. And he was bouncing these ideas off me that he was thinking of and writing and stuff. Even though I wasn't the so-called target audience for the book, he wanted to know what I thought. And, I had just graduated with a philosophy degree. So I talked to him a lot about his ideas and a lot about this book and how excited he was to write it. So I had a lot of experience with him. Then, of course, at the end of 1989, I moved back to Japan. And he continued to write the book. He wrote it through about 1992. I would hear reports of it. This is before we had Zoom and before we had Skype. So we would call on the phone and we would write letters and I would hear how the book's doing. And I actually heard that he had finished it, but he wasn't able to publish it. He wasn't part of that mainstream publishing world. So, and he never had an agent. So he was never able to publish it. And then, of course, he got ill. And, he put the book in his desk drawer and the whole thing, all the stories that we've talked about, talking to people, getting articles written about him, Mitch coming along, then he passes away. And about probably 8 years after he passed away, so Tuesdays with Morrie is still on the bestseller list, maybe about 2003. Something like that, 2002. I guess 2003 would have been after it is off the list. But anyway, somewhere around that time, 2002, 2003, I still was going back and forth between Tokyo and Boston, being a journalist and visiting my mother. And I was in my father's study, which my mother kept exactly as it had been when he was alive. So full of books. It's got like a rug on the wall that was made by people who loved him with all these wonderful sentiments, gigantic dictionary with and I pulled open one of his desk drawers and I found this huge bound black, what would you call it? Like, it's not a folder, but like a book bound with much bigger than regular book size, like letter size paper. And I was, what is this? And I opened it up and I saw the first page and I immediately realized what it was and that this was a manuscript that Dad had written that had never been published. And I realized, like, wow, with Tuesdays with Morrie actually being well known, we have an opportunity to publish this book. So yeah, I rediscovered the book probably 10 years or more after my father stored it in his desk drawer, and 13, 14 years after I had talked to my father about it.
Mm-hmm. But you didn't publish it until 2023.
Right. So that's sort of a long and winding story where I had a very active journalism career in Japan. At the end of it, I was the Asia bureau chief of Billboard magazine. I was also working for the major television station, the national broadcaster of Japan, which is called NHK. I was working for their news program, and I was working for a record label. So, I was doing a lot of different things in Tokyo. My editing process was really slow. I also was working more or less with my mother. So I put two essays in the book, one at the front and one at the back. The back one is about my mom and basically how she edited all of my father's work. And we can talk about the academic work that my father published. One book was very important in the field of social psychology. So we can talk about that if you like. But since my mother had edited most of my father's work, I was meeting with her and we were talking about how to edit it, but it was very intermittent because I would be in Tokyo, then I would go and see her. And so the first edit probably took me years, and then there was the big task, gargantuan task of getting a literary agent. Despite the fact that my father was well known, getting a literary agent, entering that world is not that easy. And since you're a librarian, you probably know there's no way to get a book deal with a major publisher without a literary agent. It's essentially impossible. So I had to go about finding an agent. And we went through a couple of agents, maybe earlier ones that I wasn't that happy with. They weren't also maybe happy with the pace. It was a very slow pace. Maybe, they gave up on me or I gave up on them. And yeah, it took a long time to find an agent that I was happy with. And, my mother was also part of the process. So it was some of the things in the process had to be explained to her, like, we're going to have to give up control of this and that sort of thing. And it took her a long time to come to terms with some of those things. So there was a lot of moving parts in going from the manuscript to the published version. But in the end, I got a really great agent and he did a fantastic job. I'm really happy with Blackstone. They did a fantastic job. I think you've seen a copy of the book. They took all of my artistic ideas and how I wanted it to look very seriously and designed it exactly as I had described, and they put lots of photos in there. It's as parts of it, I don't know if you remember or not, but parts of it feel like a family album. There's photos throughout our life, and that cost them money. They that was very kind of them to do that. So I'm extremely happy with the final product. And yeah, it took a long time, but there was a lot of moving parts involved in that.
So I have a question that might be a little bit strange. Is that did you ever feel like you might not publish it because did you ever feel overshadowed by him? I mean, you had your own life and your own art, your own work and all of that, but did you ever feel like it was a shadow and that if you did this book, it would just be part of that shadow?
Sorry, I don't know that there's the shadow. How are you describing the shadow there?
Meaning that your father left is just this big, figure in your life and our lives too, right? So how do you come out from under that as yourself, as your own person?
That's funny. Yeah, okay, I get it now. Because to me, it was hard to understand your question because the experience is exactly the opposite. I mean, me doing this book is me honoring my father and my father's legacy and getting what he wanted to communicate out in the world there. I feel like I've done something to, push his legacy forward, just the opposite. I mean, I understand what you mean, feel like shadow or, overshadowed. Some people are overshadowed by very famous fathers, but it's kind of different in this situation because he's not really alive. He's not with us. So, and he wasn't ever famous as a living person. So it's very different in that way. But yeah, as I said, it's kind of the opposite. This book really makes me feel like I contributed something and I honored my father's legacy. I should say that my mother had her concerns about publishing the book, which is one of the reasons it took so long. And I mean, I understood her concerns. I didn't share them, but I understood them. She was saying the feeling and the goodwill and the sort of almost angelic halo around Tuesdays with Morrie is so strong that if we do something else, that maybe people will view it in a different way. And of course, I thought that was just crazy, that people would respond to this book, they would love it and appreciate it in the same way. Maybe not as many people, but the people who get a hold of it, I think it's very much, helpful for them. And she came around to that opinion as well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I want to interject one thing here because I did see something in the chat. A woman has maybe not corrected me, but I think this is exactly the woman that I was trying to refer to. The woman who first wrote about death and in the public sphere and very with a lot of insight is named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Yeah. That's who I was trying to think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so if anybody has questions, remember to put them in the Q&A. We have a few more minutes, but I will just keep going. What were some of your favorite memories of being with Morrie, your father? Not just when he was sick, but before that.
Sure. I mean, most of my favorite memories are probably before that. Not that I don't have a lot of memories when he's sick. Obviously, these are childhood things, and I'll relate some of them. I've thought about for a long time, and this may be one of your questions at the end, whether I'd want to do my own book on my father. And I decided a long time ago that I didn't want to, and I probably couldn't do a biography because I don't really have enough information, and all of the people who know all that information are gone now. I interviewed a lot of his colleagues and people who were elderly, and I have a lot of stories, but it's not enough to make a biography. But it is enough to create stories and feeling about the man from people's reflections. And I may do a book on that. And some of my own stories are in there. Sorry, I just have to, maybe it's bad that we have this chat because I just see what people are writing and I have to interject. So I told you previously that my father was very interested in community, very interested in helping people. And I had many examples of that. One of the examples of that, one of the primary examples of that is listed in the chat. He co-founded a self-help mental health center in Cambridge called Greenhouse with two other people. And this was really important to him. It was also really important to him to get mental health help out to people who didn't necessarily have a lot of money, because, back in the 70s when he founded it, it was only people with money who could see therapists. It wasn't covered by insurance or anything like that. So this was a pay-as-you-like mental health center, where if you didn't have any money, you didn't pay anything. And I see somebody here has mentioned, though I don't think they spelled their last names correctly, but we'll forgive that, some very close friends of the family, one of whom I met very recently. So they're Hoblitzels, Hob Hoblitzel and his wife, Olivia Hoblitzel. Hob unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but I met Olivia very recently, who still lives in the Boston area, and she was very much involved in Greenhouse. And there's other people out there. So thank you, Sharon, for writing that. And yes, Greenhouse is a central part of my father's contribution to the community and all the people around it. Oh, this person also used to dance with him at Dance Free. That's fantastic. But anyway, I just wanted to mention Hob Hoblitzel and Olivia Hoblitzel, who were also both Buddhists. And Olivia has written books about losing her husband and how Buddhism helped her deal with that grieving process. So if people are interested in that particular angle, they can look for Olivia Hoblitzel's book. I think she spells her last name Hob Blitzel or Blitzelle is how I think it's spelled. Hoblitzel.
We'll look for it.
Yeah.
So I guess my question really is about, you said that there's a big difference. There can be a difference between the personal and the perceived.
Yes.
And so because we feel like we know Morrie so well from Tuesdays with Morrie and the plays and things like that, I'm just wondering, like, some of your more nothing like, I'm like, you know what I mean?
Sorry. I forgot your question. Right. Okay. So I'll give you a couple of ones. I love this memory of mine because my father had this incredible childlike quality in him. You know that we have two words, being a librarian, you'll know this very well. We have two words in English, childish and childlike. And childish is bad. That's the immature, pouting, bad. And childlike is looking at that world with wonder and innocence. That's the good one, right? Mm-hmm. So we used to love to play hearts, and we would play as a family around the kitchen table. I think this story took place at the end of my high school, or maybe I was back home from college. And we used to play hearts, but if you built up a big lead in hearts is actually, you don't want to take points. If you take points, it's bad. The person with the lowest score wins. So if one person had built up a lot of points, there was no way they were going to win. So we instituted this rule where, if you got to 100, you lost, and whoever had the lowest amount of points would win. That's the standard rule. But we instituted if you landed exactly on 100, you could go back to 0. And so we were playing this game, and my father was losing badly, and he landed on 100, and he was like, all right, I lost. And I said, Dad, you remember we introduced this rule, you hit exactly 100, you're back at 0. And he was so happy. He jumped up out of his chair, and he was in his 60s when this happened, and clapped his hands like a little boy, and sat down again, ready to start over and play the game. And it just so much exemplified this childlike nature that he had that was so pure, and so much looked at the world as this, wonderful place, that so few adults maintain that kind of childlike innocence.
Mm-hmm. I love that story. So when he was sick then, do you feel like he was able to maintain some of that? Or what were his quiet times like when you didn't have like a ton of people around you?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it briefly. There was periods in the beginning he was very depressed, and then he decided like, oh, I'm going to, use the time that I have left. But of course, there were times where he was still depressed and sad that, he was nearing the end. He was only 77, 78, and had always been very healthy. I assumed that my father was going to live to 100. He was very healthy. He had tremendous amount of energy before he got ill. But there were quiet times when he felt depressed and he felt sad. There were contemplative times when he would, think. But as he writes both in, as Mitch mentions in both the play and the book, he felt most alive and most, engaged with the world when he was talking to people and relating to people. That was really his thing, was to relate to other people and, share with other people. And that's a big part of the wisdom of Morrie as well, in terms of that's a value that he puts out there. It's like, what gives your life meaning? Sharing your experiences with other people, sharing time with the people you love or your friends or, what have you.
Mm-hmm. So Tuesdays with Morrie was really about, Mitch Albom's discussions with him. But what do you think your father would have liked? It couldn't be the same thing for people to have walked away from his story, not Tuesdays with Morrie, but his life story.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think that Tuesdays with Morrie does a good job in summing it up. I'm just wondering if there's anything that I could add. I think, and this is also, of course, part of the wisdom of Morrie, that he would think that you need to latch on to the important things of life and understand what's not important. And for example, the size of your bank account when you're on your deathbed is not important. But what is important is all the times that you shared with the loved ones, the times that you had meaningful conversations with people, or just experienced different emotions with people that you love. That's what's really important in life. And I think that Tuesdays with Morrie, captures that. And I think that Wisdom of Morrie also amplifies it. But I think that it's pretty much all there. I'm trying to think if there's anything that he would feel that was left out. I don't think that Mitch needs to hear this, but if my father was here, I'm pretty sure he would say, Mitch did a pretty great job.
I'm guessing Mitch knows.
Yeah, I think he does. I think he does.
Do you still keep in touch with him?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Mitch is a close family friend. I mean, this guy is, it's like you can't even begin to describe it. It's like he does so many things. He's so busy. He's still a sports writer. He has a column, like a community column in the Detroit Free Press. He has a radio show that's like 5 days a week drive time. He still writes novels. He has a new novel coming out. I'm not even sure if that one's a novel. Most of them are novels. This one may be nonfiction. He has a new book coming out. I think it is it is fiction. I think it's called Twice. It's coming out like next week. And it's not like a surprise to say Mitch has a book coming out next week. He's written like 12 books in the last, whatever it is, 20 years or whatever. And that's in addition to everything else he does. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that he opened, finances, and runs a orphanage in Haiti, which he was going to, half of his time was spent in Haiti until he wasn't able to go there anymore in the present political turmoil. But the amount of things this guy does is just mind-blowing, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a whole nother story.
So a couple of people have asked me about Have a Little Faith by Mitch Albom.
Mm-hmm. I saw that in there, yeah.
Yeah, I have not read that. So is that about Morrie?
No, none of the other ones are about my father. That's fine. I think that he feel like he wrote that, he accomplished it, he said what needed to be said, and he's moved on. All of them have a spiritual aspect to them, so that's what ties them all together. Obviously, Have a Little Faith has it in the title, but he's got one called The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, and et cetera, et cetera. So they're all of his books have similar theme, in that what you do is going to come back to you, and the effects, if you put good things out in the world, you never know how it affects other people. It could have this effect that you're not even aware of, that changes somebody else's life for the better, exponentially. So those are often the themes. I mean, I'm hesitant to talk about Mitch's work because it's Mitch, but his work is really, I would say, in some way informed by the mitzvah of being with my father.
Amazing. So we just have a couple more minutes, and I'd like to end this discussion with asking you, what do you want us to remember about your father?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, once again, I think it's pretty much all there in the books, a man who was full of love and compassion for everybody, and really, it was really almost his life's work to try and help people in whatever way that he could. And I think in some ways, if not most ways, he accomplished that. But yeah, as a man who, I think he would want to be remembered as a man who was full of love and compassion.
Mm-hmm. It certainly seems that way. Oops, there goes my desk. Sorry. Thank you so much, Rob. This has been fantastic. Really enjoying the conversation, and remembering when I first read Tuesdays with Morrie, and thinking, I was younger, obviously, so death wasn't such a thing for me. But as I've gotten older, it resonates with me in so many ways. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate all of your personal stories and helping us better understand Morrie the person, and not Morrie of Tuesdays of Morrie.
Yeah. Can I add one thing? Because, sure. I've been reading the chat, and it seems like this always happens. I mean, there's more people on this than when I sit in a library. There's people, because it's Massachusetts, there's people who knew my father. And yeah. I'm always more than eager to hear those stories. I saw one person who said that they were at Greenhouse and they also danced free. Another person was with the yoga teacher that was with my father named Fern. So I'd love to be in touch with those people. If you want to put your email address in the chat, I will certainly reach out to you. I'm not at all adverse to giving an email address, and I'm going to give it now if people want to get in touch with me. Well, actually, it's easier than that. There's a wisdomofmorrie.com Facebook page. Sorry, it's not Facebook. It's a website, wisdomofmorrie.com website. And there's a contact us page there. And if you contact us, we will absolutely get back to you very quickly. I keep very close tabs on that page. Mm-hmm. So if anyone wants to contact me, I'm more than welcome that.
Actually, I'll be sending that out in the follow-up email to everybody. So keep a lookout for that with the recording. And Rob, thank you again. Next time you're in Massachusetts, maybe I'll come and see where you're speaking.
Yeah, or you can come and visit the grave if you like.
I could do that, but I also would love to see you again. So okay, I appreciate your time. And everybody, thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories. They have been, I think I'll cry later, but I appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.